one of the things that Artemisia Gentileschi is very famous for are her paintings of Judith and Holofernes. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story and show you a few paintings so you can sort of get the historical context of this. Artemisia painted 4 different paintings of Judith and Holofernes. And so first we want to tell you the story. This is a Bible story. It's from the book of Judith. If you have a modern Protestant Bible, you will not find the book of Judith in that book. It has been removed from Protestant Bibles. Now, it wasn't immediately removed from Protestant Bibles. It's in the Luther Bible, the Luther translation of the Bible. And I understand up until the 11th or 12th edition of the King James or authorized version of the Bible still contained what are now called the apocryphal books. But eventually, many of the Protestants removed certain books from the Bible. They removed the book of Maccabees, Tobit, the wisdom books, the book of Judith. But it's a wonderful story, and essentially it reminds me in some ways of the story of David defeating Goliath. And so essentially you could say she's a female David. She saves her city, not from the Philistines, but from the Assyrians. So Judith is a chaste and virtuous widow, and she has been in seclusion, I forget how long, I think it's 3 years, mourning the death of her husband. Her city of Betula is besieged by the Assyrians, and the Assyrians are some of the most cruel of the warriors of the ancient world. They're known for going out and coming to a city and say, surrender or we'll kill every living thing. And then when the city doesn't surrender and the Assyrians defeat them, they'll go in and kill every living thing. The Bible doesn't talk about that, but they just say the Assyrians, so we presumably know that. So the city of Betula, the Hebrew city, is being besieged by the Assyrians. And it looks bad. But Judith comes out of her period of mourning and decides that she has a plan that she can save her city. And she washes herself, she bathes, she puts on her beautiful clothes again, and she goes out of the city and goes to the Assyrian camp. And she takes her maidservant with her. She also takes food, which I thought that should have tipped them off because, of course, Jewish dietary laws mean that she can't eat Assyrian food. So she goes to the camp and she presents herself as a traitor. She tells them that she knows a secret way into the city and she will show them the way if they will spare her and her family. Well, the Assyrian general Holofernes is much taken with this beautiful young lady, and he thinks, okay, this is it. He gives permission for her to go out and pray, and he's permission for her to eat her own kosher food, we'd say today. But he invites her to a banquet, and that's when she explains that she's brought her own food. He invites her to a banquet, and it turns out it's a banquet with 2 people, just him and Judith. The Holofernes proceeds to get very drunk, thinking he's going to have his way with this lovely lady. And he falls down drunk, and Judith takes his sword and cuts off his head. And then she and the maidservant put it in a sack. And they go out back to the city, because remember, she's been given permission to go out and pray, so that's what everybody thinks she's doing. It's back to the city. The next morning, the Assyrians go to wake their general, thinking it's the last day of the siege, and they found their army literally without a head. They look over to the battlements of Betula. They see Holofernes' head displayed. They are struck with fear. The Hebrew army comes out of the city and chases the Assyrians from the field. And from there on, it sounds really very much like the Hebrews chasing the Philistines, and everyone gives thanks and praise to God. It's very much like the aftermath of the story of David and Goliath. But you'll notice Judith and her maidservant are taking much greater risks than David does. David stands back and throws stones at Goliath. And if he were to be killed, it would probably be one very swift sword stroke. If Judith and her maidservant were discovered, they would probably be raped to death. they would certainly be tortured to death. So they take great risks by going directly into the enemy camp. Now, what I want to do is show you some pictures of Judith and Holofernes. It's a very popular theme. And these are the names of the ones that are by Artemisia Gentileschi. We see Judith decapitating Holofernes, which was a painting that was done for the King of Naples in 1612 to 13. The Duke of Florence wanted his own copy, so there is a painting in the Uffizi, although it doesn't seem to be on display. I think it's in the Vasari corridor, which is open only once a year for about a month in March. We see Judith decapitating Holofernes. And then we see the picture of Judith and their maidservant from the Pitti, very close up. And then a wonderful painting in Detroit, which is the one I showed you before, I'll show you again, with Judith and their maidservant, once again, with the head of Holofernes. So here we're seeing the painting of Judith decapitating Holofernes from Naples. It is a violent, powerful scene. And as you can see, Holofernes has wakened up as his throat is being slashed. Maidservant and Judith are both holding him down. The blood is spurting. It's a bloody, gory picture. But it certainly is a powerful painting. And Judith really looks strong. She looks powerful. And it looks like she's about her work. I mean, she's determined that this person is not going to harm her city. This is the version. You can see the colors are changed just slightly. This is the version that is in the Uffizi. That's the main picture gallery in Florence. And it was a copy that was commissioned by the Duke of Florence. It's a variant. It's not exactly the same, but the same thing. You can see the spurting blood and the pressure that the women are putting on Holofernes as they are going to kill him in order to save their city. Picture in the Pitti Palace, just a very close-up view of Judith and their maidservant. They've got the head of Holofernes, as you can see. The maidservant seems to have him in a kind of basket, and they're looking over their shoulders. This could be inside the tent, or it could be after they have left and they are retreating and going back to the city and looking over their shoulder to see if anybody's following them, perhaps. This is the painting in Detroit. It shows the moment after the deed has been done. Holofernes' head has been severed, and the maidservant is putting it in a bag, essentially. This is taking place in Holofernes' tent. This is what we talked about with tenebrism. It's very dark, it's a night scene, and it's illuminated with a candle, which sends a very dramatic light on the two women. What you're seeing is a scene that is not in the Bible story, but it's something that someone who really thought about would understand. It's a moment of intense vulnerability. They've cut off Holofernes' head. They're still in the tent. They haven't escaped yet. And you can just imagine that they've heard a sound outside the tent. Maybe the soldiers are walking by. Maybe somebody's approaching the tent. They don't know if anybody's going to come in and catch them. It's that, terrifying moment. No one else has portrayed that moment but Artemisia Gentileschi. It's like that it's something that's just very, very real and gives you the feeling, not just, oh, these are great heroes, or yes, they're very powerful, or any of the other interpretations, which we'll see some more. It shows their danger, and it shows what they risked. And it is an extremely powerful painting. There's a detail of the head of Holofernes. There's a golden yellow that Artemisia uses, and it's now known as Artemisia gold. And so we see her using that in this picture. Now, I wanted to show you some other ways of showing Judith and Holofernes. There's a long tradition of interpreting this story allegorically. In the Middle Ages and certainly part of the Renaissance in the 15th century, Judith was one of the examples of what the Bible calls the strong women. And people like Judith or Esther, who risked their lives to save their people. Mary was also considered one of the strong and virtuous women of the Bible. And one of the things that the Christians would often do is they would look at the Old Testament and find what they call prefigurations or types of different Bible stories or different Bible figures, so that God was giving signs or omens throughout history about what was going to happen in the Christian era. This is how they thought of it. And sometimes you will see these books. There's the Biblia Pauperum or the Speculum Humanae Salvationis, the Bible of the Poor, or the Mirror of Human Salvation, where they'll have pictures, manuscript or woodcut pictures, with Old Testament scenes next to the New Testament scenes, for which the Old Testaments are the type. So Judith is a type, an Old Testament type for Mary defeating the devil or Mary defeating evil. Sometimes Judith is seen as an allegory of virtue conquering vice. Obviously, Holofernes is vice. Or chastity overcoming lust. Or, as we'll see in one instance, humility overcoming pride. So she's a virtue overcoming a vice, allegorically. Starting in the 16th century, and then a lot of them in the 17th century, you start to see some pictures of Judith where she's this sexy female with not many clothes on, or very low cut, her breasts are showing, or sometimes her whole body. And she becomes kind of this femme fatale who tricks the man into his death, which is not really the biblical story. It's a woman who's risking everything in order to save her people. But it seems like it's okay if the male does that and is the hero, but if a woman does it, they're not in their place. So there's some an uncomfortable interpretation, and a somewhat negative interpretation becomes applied to Judith. It's been suggested, I'm not sure of this, but it has been suggested that it's also been used as a Reformation allegory. Either the Reformation overcoming Catholicism, which one person has suggested for some paintings by Lucas Cranach, which we'll see, or a counter-Reformation image of the Catholic Church defeating the Protestant heresy. So let's look at some of these earlier examples. Montaigne, in the 15th century, shows Judith as the strong and virtuous woman. In this case, she is vertical, dressed in classical garments. There's nothing overtly sexual about her. There's not a lot of gore either. The dead body of Holofernes is back in the tent, and she is just placing the head in this sack that the maidservant is holding. Montaigne, he did a number of versions of this. This is another one where it's painted to look like a stone relief with very, very classical clothing. So Montaigne was one of the most classical of the 15th century artists. You see that here, he's applied it to a biblical story. And so once again, she's shown as a strong woman, very heroic. One of the most famous 15th century images of Judith is a bronze statue that originally was a fountain, it seems, because there's spigots there, but we also know it was also placed outside the Palazzo Vecchio, or the old palace, the city hall of Florence. It originally was a Medici commission, and it was originally in probably in the garden of the Medici palace. It has been interpreted as an allegory of lust, of chastity overcoming lust, Holofernes being the lust. But there's an inscription on the statue, and it defines it as an allegory of humility cutting off the head of pride. So we see Judith, once again, completely dressed as a chaste and virtuous woman. She's got a veil, she's completely garbed, raising the sword to slice off the head of the completely drunk, or maybe he's dead now, general Holofernes. In the 16th century, we start to see these sexy paintings of Judith. Here are some where they're Jan Metzies, son of Quentin Metzies, is showing you Judith in a transparent garment over the top half of her body. Jan von Hamessen goes even further. She's removed all of her clothes. You'll notice she's very muscular, very Michelangelesque. This, incidentally, is Katharina von Hamessen's father. So you can see some of the work that he was doing. The classicism has come to Antwerp. And here are two images that I can't say for certain, but I have sometimes seen identified as Reformation and Counter-Reformation images. On the left, you have a picture by Lucas Cranach, who was the good friend of Martin Luther and seems to have really created a lot of Protestant iconography. In this case, there's nothing necessarily to say it's Protestant. I mean, it's a biblical story. And we see Judith and her maidservant in the tent, wearing very fashionable clothing, and putting the head of Holofernes in the sack while the Assyrian army is outside and unsuspecting. There is one book which has suggested that this may be a Reformation image, that Judith is considered to be the virtuous figure, so for the Protestant Reformation, overcoming what they see as the flaws in Catholicism. The other example that I have to show you, here we see Lucas Cranach, Judith in the Assyrian camp. Werner Schrade has suggested that this should be read as a Reformation allegory, with Judith as the virtuous Protestants and Holofernes as those bad Catholics. You can, of course, turn this around. I saw this painting in a museum, and the placard on the side of it did a little explanation, and I don't know their source, but they suggested that this might be a counter-Reformation allegory. Vouvet was a French artist, so he and his patrons are going to be Catholic, and in this case, Judith is symbolizing the virtuous Catholics who are overcoming the evil Protestant heretics who are Holofernes. So it's a possibility, it could be interpreted that way. One of the most famous images of Caravaggio from the Baroque period, one of the most famous images of Judith from the Baroque period is Caravaggio's painting of Judith. And it's probably pretty certain that Artemisia Gentileschi saw this. It's now on the second floor of the Barberini Palace, which is part of the Galleria Nazionale, the National Gallery in Rome. And as you can see, Judith is slicing off Holofernes' head. There's blood spurting out from the artery. He seems to be trying to cry out, but nobody can hear him, presumably because his trachea has already been cut. And she is standing to one side so the blood doesn't get all over her, with a kind of worried look on her face, like, oh, little peeked here. And of course, in this case, we see an elderly maidservant. You'll notice the maidservant sometimes is youthful, sometimes elderly. And in the case of the Mantegna, she seems to be African. Here's our comparison. As I say, Artemisia must have seen Caravaggio's image, because we have that idea of certainly the blood spurting in Artemisia. The blood is spurting everywhere. It's spurting in the direction of the assassins as well as all over the bed. So it's a bit more dramatic. And in this case, the woman has a very different facial expression. She seems determined, she seems powerful, and certainly not, ooh, I don't want to get blood on my beautiful clothing, and I'm so sweet and, this is a powerful Judith that Artemisia has created. And here, of course, we see the example that I showed you before with Arezzo having somewhat a similar image. The idea almost that they've cut off the head and they're looking around, is someone going to discover them? And yet what Artemisia does with that image is just so totally, it's much more powerful, it's stronger. It makes you worried about them. And there is another, this one by Arezzo is in Hartford, Connecticut. And there's a very similar version, not quite as brightly colored or neutral tones, that's in the Vatican. And that's been attributed both to Arezzo and also has been considered a possible copy after the Arezzo by Artemisia. But it's, you know, so close, it's very hard to say. This is a very interesting and in many ways very original painting of an allegory of painting. It's known as La Pictura, and it dates from 1630. It is usually considered to be a self-portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi. It is usually considered to be a self-portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi. And I just recently read that some people are perhaps doubting that. But I think we'll just keep this as the idea that it is a self-portrait with the caveat that we may be wrong about this. But it's a very interesting painting. As you can see, the point of view, when you're looking down on the figure, creates this very interesting negative shape. The negative shape is the shape around the figure, sort of the background shape. And then the figure itself is in a very unusual and interesting shape that forms a kind of a strong, powerful diagonal, and diagonals often imply action, movement, excitement, drama. I always want to say dramatic diagonals. It shows a woman, presumably Artemisia, drawing or painting actually on a canvas that has been prepared with a reddish brown ground. That was a technique that Titian used to use, and other artists obviously did as well, to give warmth to their colors. One of the things that's fascinating to me about that particular point of view where you're looking down is that it always seems to me that Artemisia is centuries ahead of her time, because in the 19th century, Degas would do this unusual point of view where you were looking down on, for example, ballerinas. And it's often remarked how innovative that is. Mary Cassatt does it sometimes too, having an unusual point of view where you're looking down on the figure. Artemisia Gentileschi had done it all those centuries before. Now, one of the interesting things about this is it's considered to be an allegory of painting. In Italian, La Pictura, which is the name that we give the painting, would mean literally the painting, although in many Romance languages they use the article the in times that we might not. We would just say painting. So I'm going to say La Pictura. Pictura is a feminine noun. It ends in an A. And like many Romance languages and other languages as well, Italian has both feminine and masculine nouns. So there are many pictures by male artists where they show an allegory of painting, usually a male artist painting, sometimes painting a woman who might be painting, or it might be fame or something like that. But since pictura itself is a feminine noun, we have this interesting visual with the painting and linguistic concept that only a woman artist can embody painting. So she is both the allegorical figure of painting, pictura, as well as the painter herself. I have just a few more pictures to show you without too much commentary. This is a painting by Artemisia Gentileschi. Formerly, you would see it identified as Fame. It's an allegorical figure, and it's hard to see because of the tenebrism. It's reproduced very darkly, but there is a trumpet in it. It has since then been re-identified as Clio, the muse of history. There is, I think, a copy of Thucydides here, which would certainly identify her as history. And the trumpet is sometimes associated with history as well as fame, presumably the famous people in history. And here we see a late picture by her, the birth of John the Baptist. One interesting thing is Artemisia did have male pupils. And sometimes she had to struggle. But her work is so very, very powerful, and I'll let you decide, could she be one of those women artists who we might want to call great? I would think so.